Okay, so today's topic is soil. Now, how does soil become soil? Well, we have to take it back through the steps we talked about. We've got weathering, breaking down of sediments, or breaking down into sediments from a rock. Erosion, the movement of those sediments. Deposition, the dropping off of sediments. And then lastly, that's what forms our soil. So let's just review. Remember, weathering can be affected by a variety of things, such as surface area. In our sugar cube lab, we increase surface area by crushing the cube, which then increase the rate of weathering, making it dissolve faster. So weathering is one component of breaking of a rock in order to make up the components that could then become soil. Then erosion is going to be when we move it using wind, water, ice, or even animals like we talked about before. So soil erosion can happen in a lot of ways. So there are a couple of things that we do with soil erosion. So the characteristics of the soil are going to determine what type of soil you have, but also whether or not it's going to be prone to erosion. Climate, we talked about as a particular part that could affect weathering and erosion. Well, if you have a wet climate, you have more water erosion. If you have a dry climate, you would have more wind erosion. Slope can affect erosion. The steeper the slope, the more erosion you would have going down the slope. And then type of vegetation. Vegetation, as we talked about before, could be plants, and those plants can either prevent erosion, keeping it on the surface, or it can actually cause erosion if they're too heavy. But generally, vegetation is going to be a way we decrease erosion. So with farming, we often have erosion in our fields. This would be an example of rill erosion. So you can see there's little channels coming through the field where a runoff would be running. As they widen, you're going to get to a gully erosion. So once they widen and deepen, they become a gully. So you go from rill, the small ones, to gully, the larger ones. So here's an example of a gully that would be eroding. It's much wider than the ones before. So farmers don't like this. You wouldn't want this going right through your crops. It wouldn't be a good thing to have all of your soil that's rich in nutrients running away into a body of water nearby. You want to keep it on your soil. So they're going to try to prevent erosion, to prevent things like this. During the Dust Bowl in the early 1900s, we had over-farming in the middle of our country, in the Midwest, and what they did is they made our soil so dry and so full of inorganic material that it couldn't grow things. And once the vegetation died, then you had all of that wind carrying all of that sediment a large distance and creating lots and lots of dust. So soil isn't just dirt. It's actually a combination of mineral, organic matter, water, and air. And the percentages are roughly 45% mineral matter. That's the inorganic component. And then you have 5% organic, which would be your dead materials or living things that are still living within the soil. And then the other 50% is either air or water. Now, if you notice, there's arrows in between air and water saying that they can change. One can be more or less than 25%. And that would be because of climate. So if you have a drier climate, then you're going to have more air in your soil. If you have a wetter climate, you would have more water in your soil. Other factors that control what kind of soil you have are going to be the parent material. Now that's what's underneath. That's generally the bedrock directly under the soil, unless you have a transported soil that's moved from somewhere else, but it's whatever the inorganic material was, whatever rock it was before it formed and was broken by weathering to form the soil pieces that become the inorganic minerals. Then over time can affect soil formation. The longer the time period, the more developed soil becomes. So you're going to have more distinct layers, and we'll take a look at some layers here in a second, but they're going to be more distinct over longer periods of time. And then climate is the biggest control for soil formation. Precipitation and temperature drive the amount of organic material you'll find in soil and the different minerals even found in soil. So plants and animals are another factor that influence soil formation. So you have organisms that can be in the soil that can actually add nutrients to it. They also aerate soil by digging it up and getting air into some of those things that need air. And then the last factor for soil formation is called slope. And the steeper the slope, the worse the soil. So you wouldn't want to grow any type of crop on the side of a mountain because there's not much soil on the side of a mountain because most of it will be brought down by gravity and eroded down to the base of the hill. So this is just a look of how general topography looks near a river. So there's a river here in the center, and around that river you see little plots, and that would be where you would have your most agriculture. That's called the floodplain. It has lots of nutrients, it's nice and flat, it has a pretty developed soil underneath of it. For the most part, it's not compacted, so it's nice and loose, so you can dig it up, and it would be easy to till in order to plant seeds. And then you have your slopes on the side here. These would be much thinner soils on the side of the slope where you can't accumulate much soil. And it would be thicker in the higher elevations. And that would be your residual soil that's not being moved anywhere else. Now, the soil triangle is what we're going to be using in class to identify the texture of a soil. So soil texture can either be sandy, silty, or clay, but there's kind of a variation of each one. So if you look at the soil triangle, there's a little arrow, and that tells you which percentage way you're looking at. So on this one, clay are the lines running parallel across the screen. Silt are the ones that are kind of at a diagonal, going from right to left. And then you have sand, which is going from right to left, from the right on the bottom to left at the top. And what you're going to do is if you establish how much clay you have in a soil. So let's say you have 40% clay, and then you find out that you have 40% silt. So if you have 40% clay and 40% silt, that means 20% would be left over to be sand. So if I were to go through and calculate where those crisscross, they're going to crisscross right here in the corner of clay loam, and that would be my soil texture type. So that you find where all 3 points meet and intersect, and that would be your soil texture. And we'll talk about this some more in class, but the bottom line is there are a lot of different textures, but they all start from either sand, silt, or clay, and how much of each you have inside. Now, the soil profile is what divides it up into layers. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through the different layers. You have O at the top. This is where your humus or organic matter is. It's very, very dark in color. Then you have a little bit larger organic layer called the A horizon. And then the next major one is called the B horizon, and that's where your clay begins to form. And then the C horizon is broken up pieces of this bedrock below. So you have bedrock, C horizon, and then this would be your B horizon. Your A horizon's above B, and then your O. And this one had an E horizon that was extra, but let's take a look at a different one. So let's look at one that's a little more basic. You've got humus at the top in O, your soil leaching, and this is some of your organic matter in A. B would be your accumulation of salts and clay. And then C is your broken up bedrock from down here. It makes up little pieces. So if you were digging a hole, the soil will start to get clumpy when you hit the B. You can always tell you've hit the B when it starts to clump and you have pieces of clay and they smush in your hands. That means you're at the B horizon. Once you start to hit large boulders and rocks, that means you're in the C horizon. And then once you dig so far down that you're actually hitting solid rock, that would be your bedrock. And this is an example of a real picture taken outside. So you can see that you have your dark layer at the top, that's your organic matter, and then as you go down, it gets lighter and lighter, and that's because you're having less organic matter. So there's most organic matter at the top and less as you go down. And if you look, the bedrock would be even below this picture frame. And this is just another one. And in this one, you can see the white spots. That's not snow. That's called calce. It's a calcium carbonate compound found in some soils. It's actually Tums, basically, that have been crumbled up, but it's nature's Tums, if you will. Now, the A horizon is known for its organic material, like worms and things like that. And these are some of the more common soil types. You've got petalford, pedicle, and laterite, but I don't really need you to know the names. I just want you to look at how soils can look as they go down. Now, in a forest, you're going to have a lot more organic matter than you would in the tropics. The tropics, or your tropical soils, are very, very oxidized. This is a chemical weathering thing. Remember, rusting in rock, it happens when that iron oxide is produced. It's very, very bad for soil. Iron oxide is terrible for plant growth, so you wouldn't want to grow things in the tropical regions. So that's why deforestation is such a problem. We cut down trees in the rainforest to start growing crops, but nothing grows in rainforest soil because it's so poor from all that iron oxide. Now, short grass, like we'd have in the Midwest, has a lot more organic material at the top, as does the soil of evergreen forest. This is actually a little bit more north than we are, but you still have a lot of organic matter that would be good for growing things. And this is just another one where you can see some organic matter. Nice and dark at the top, lighter as you go down. That would be what you would want to grow things in. And remember, these layers aren't always there to begin with. If we were to dig outside of our school, it was built in the last 10 years. There wouldn't really be defined soil layers. It's all been mixed up by construction. You need time for these layers to form so that you could actually see the different stripes of color. So that's all we have on soil today. Just remember that soil is forming as a result of weathering, erosion, and then deposition. So soil whether the hard bedrock or parent material is weathered into pieces, moved by wind, water, glacial or biological erosion, and then dropped off and deposited somewhere where it becomes soil that will form as part of our soil formation.